A few nights ago, I left a late night screening of Spider-Man Brand New Day, feeling so hyped about Spider-Man in a way that none of the other Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man outings have really made me feel. I thought I felt that way when I came out of No Way Home a few years ago. The ending of No Way Home especially made me quite teary, to be honest, because it felt like it galvanized everything that I love about Spider-Man. But here's the distinction, and it's a realization that I've only had since seeing Brand New Day, is that No Way Home reminded me that I love Spider-Man, and Brand New Day has reminded me why I love Spider-Man. Hey heroes, I'm Josh from Panels to Pixels, and this is going to be a kind of brief, spoiler-free review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. I don't typically do movie reviews, but if the mood strikes me and I feel like I have something to say, and I certainly do with this movie. Obviously, with it being spoiler-free, I'm going to only touch on things that are revealed in the trailer or in marketing materials. But if you don't want to know anything at all, I would recommend going in, completely blind on this one. I mean, at this point, I'm recording this on the Saturday of opening weekend, and it looks like this movie is going to do numbers, so I imagine you've probably already seen it already if you're watching this. So one of the things that struck me about this movie within the first 15-20 minutes is that this is almost an adaptation of the PlayStation 4 game, the Insomniac game. I notoriously at the time did not like the PlayStation 4 game. I gave it a pretty negative review back in 2018, and I caught a lot of flack for that. And so when I could tell within the first few action scenes and web swinging scenes how much of a kind of visual influence that game had on this movie, I was a little bit like, oh, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe this isn't my flavor of Spider-Man, because I really felt that the game was aimed at a kind of different audience, not necessarily like someone like me who grew up on the 90s series and the Neversoft game and the 90s comics and stuff like that. I would say that the Insomniac games are a very kind of sterilized version of Spider-Man, to my mind. It's very slick and streamlined, super technological and super kind of grounded. But Brand New Day takes all the stuff that really works about those games, like the combat and the web gadgets and the kind of quick time event type things where he's riding on top of moving cars and webbing helicopters up between, cranes. The web swinging in this movie owes a lot to the kind of kineticism in the game, that real weighty kind of pendulum physics that the game's developers talked about a lot. You can see that on screen here. But I'm happy to say that it dumps a lot of that kind of gamer aesthetic that I really didn't vibe with, all of the carbon fiber paneling and tactical gear on the enemies, and it embraces a more comic book design. It also takes a lot of the kind of thematic and character ideas from the game, but it takes a layer of cringe off. Not to turn this into a rehash of my old Spider-Man PS4 review, but there were two recurring jokes in that game that just made me cringe so much. One was about Peter burning some pork dumplings, which was seemingly the only in-joke between him and MJ. Like, the only attempt at any chemistry between them was that he kept bringing up, oh, remember that time I burnt the dumplings? And then there was the infamous Spider Cop, which a lot of people seem to like, but my God, my toes just curled every time he did the Spider Cop routine with Yuri. And I guess the reason I'm bringing that up is because in Brand New Day, Spider-Man has a direct line with the police captain, who in the movie is called Gene DeWolf. And if you're a comic book fan, you know that name comes with a lot of baggage, but the less said about that, the better. But the rapport between Spidey and DeWolf in this movie is just so much more believable and fun. And that's mostly due to the fact that Tom Holland is just charming AF. Tom Holland just is Spider-Man as far as I'm concerned. Not necessarily my favourite version, but I feel like he encapsulates the role so well and all of the different facets of Peter's personality. He's funny, he's dorky, he can be brash, he can be sensitive, he can be a jerk sometimes, which I think is like crucial to Peter Parker. It's such a well-rounded portrayal of the character, and Holland just relays the heavy emotional stuff so well. In all of his Spider-Man movies, actually. I have my issues with those movies, but it's never about Tom Holland and his performance. And every time his little eyes well up and his lip starts to quiver, you just feel that on such a visceral level. It's like a real gut punch. He's like incredibly relatable. It's very impressive. I'm not going to talk about all of the performances in this movie, but I feel like Zendaya deserves a special mention as MJ. This is a more mature, self-assured version of MJ, which is appropriate really because she's that little bit older and they're all in this new chapter of their life. So she doesn't do as much of the kind of post-ironic teenage snark, which, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That was really right for the character at high school age, but it's a very authentic and believable evolution of the character, I feel. One of the most amazing things about Zendaya's performance as MJ has always been how they navigate around the damsel in distress tropes, because she always demonstrates a lot of agency, even when, Spider-Man is coming in and scooping her up and saving the day. And that's a delicate web to weave, if I, may be so corny. So, as a big 90s cartoon fan, I was very intrigued by the trailers. And, any other 90s Spider Man cartoon fans, the spider sensors would be going off at the idea that they could be adapting the neogenic nightmare storyline. This idea of Spider Man becoming more spider than man, developing the organic webbing and, other things, the kind of web cocoon that you see in the trailer. And there are certainly some body horror elements in this movie. It doesn't go full The Fly. And, if you are a 90s cartoon fan, it doesn't commit as hard to the idea as the 90s cartoon. Maybe, unfortunately. But I do think it's kind of bringing back an essential part of the character for me, which is the kind of body horror stuff. In the first Raimi movie, when Peter gets the bite and he has like a feverish nightmare, and then the next day he gets the hairs on his fingers and the webbing is kind of icky and all that stuff. I feel that Spider-Man as a concept is inherently creepy. And even Stan Lee and Steve Ditko felt that back in the day. I think Stan Lee was intrigued by the idea that people were afraid of spiders. And Ditko always drew him as a bit of a creep. And that was kind of juxtaposed against the idea that as a kind of a nerd, he was considered a creep by his peers. Speaking of the comics, I've talked about the influence of the game and the 90s cartoon, but the influence of the comics is felt all over this movie, even down to like, there are some shots that are like, recreations of comic book covers. There's like an amazing Fantasy 15 homage in there, and there's like Todd McFarlane poses and stuff like that. They're really cool to spot and recognize as a comic book fan, but they do sometimes feel a little bit out of place, especially because, as we're going to talk about, so much of this movie like looks real, like it's like the practical suit and on practical locations and stuff like that, and then all of a sudden it'll be like a super, just for 1 second there'll be a shot that's super CGI, and it was clearly the purpose of that was just to do a cover recreation. I got to talk about the Hulk in this movie. There was one Hulk moment in this movie that properly gave me goosebumps, as a diehard Hulk fan. And, I like the smart Hulk personas and stuff like that as a big Peter David fan. But there is just something about the Savage Hulk and how great the Ruffalo Hulk was in the early days of the MCU. And this film kind of acknowledges that by like directly referencing scenes from Avengers and Age of Ultron, like the two main like Hulk action sequences in this movie. They feel like direct homages to one of the best scenes in Avengers and one of the best Hulk scenes in Age of Ultron. And Mark Ruffalo, who I find to be a bit hit and miss sometimes, especially when he tries to do a bit too much humor, it doesn't always land for me. But in this movie, I was like, oh, he is a great Bruce Banner. Banner's introduction to this movie comes with a lot of kind of science mumbo jumbo, and there is some like conversations between certain characters at the midpoint of this movie where there is some like big Deus Ex Machina type stuff where like, they're trying to solve a genome code or whatever it is, find the reason for a mutation, and there are characters who are like, first year of university science students suddenly, know the answer to this amazing, this thing that would literally change the course of human history. And it's a little bit like, that's very convenient. Sadie Sink is in this movie in a mystery role, which I'm not going to spoil here, but I will say that the casting for this character is fantastic. And I'm trying not to give it away, but like, if this is the future of the MCU and they continue to cast in this direction, it makes me very happy. I'm not a Stranger Things person, so I didn't really know what to expect. And actually, whenever I see any of the Stranger Things kids, they're not kids now, they're all like in their mid-20s, but whenever I see any of those Stranger Things actors cast in any movies, like I'm thinking of like Finn Wolfhard in Ghostbusters and stuff like that, I'm always a bit like, oh, you're a TV actor. I'm not sure if you're ready to be in movies yet, which is a wild thing for me to say because obviously all of the Stranger Things actors are way more accomplished at acting than I am at anything, frankly. But I'm going to say it anyway. But I didn't know what to expect. Actually, I did see Sadie Sink in The Whale, but I don't remember her like shining particularly in that, which isn't necessarily a mark against her. It's just that Brendan Fraser, it's like a character piece for him. Anyway, I really like Sadie Sink in this movie. She has a kind of a tragic backstory to her. They do the empathetic villain thing, and it rang true for me. I find myself empathizing with her. To be honest, it's more about the ramifications for the future of things in the MCU that got me excited. And to that end, again, trying not to give anything away, but her kind of costuming and everything, like just her civilian costuming, it made me feel like they are targeting like a specific kind of era. It's like kind of Y2K kind of dress that she was going for. And it recalls to me like a certain era of comics kind of associated with this character, that made me think like, oh, if that's the way that things are going, then, you know, I think this is very cool. Brand New Day is a really good-looking MCU movie. I feel it's got a very filmic quality to it. The colors are really well balanced and warm. It might actually be the best-looking MCU movie since Age of Ultron, which might be a bit of a hot take. But before the Russo brothers came in and kind of made everything, concrete grey as standard. As I mentioned, there's like a lot of practical sets in this movie. I'm sure there is some, invisible CGI going on as well, and digital mats and stuff like that. But there's a real sense of tangibility to the kind of New York streets and everything in this movie. And the suit, oh my God, the suit, the practical suit looks so good. You know, when Civil War came out and they did like a lot of digital touch-ups and smoothening of the suit. And at the time we were told that because Spider-Man was a last-minute addition into the movie, and they had to kind of work with an in-progress suit for that movie, that they had to kind of do a full digital paint over. But then even in Homecoming and No Way Home, those suits looked very digital. And then once you got the Iron Spider suit, it was a bit like, what are we doing here? And then at the end of No Way Home, he gets that classic suit, which looks so good with the metallic blue and everything. But again, it was very digital. In this movie, it is so obviously a real suit. You can see the sheen of the fabric, and you can see the kind of the micro texture of the fabric and the fuzziness of it in every shot. And there are times in this movie where Spider-Man is just, standing there talking to somebody, and you're like, my God, that is Spider-Man. That is what Spider-Man would look like in real life. It actually reminds me of, and I mean this as the highest compliment, it reminds me of the 1977 TV show, where it is just very obviously a guy in a suit. But that's what Spider-Man is supposed to be. He's supposed to be the most down-to-earth superhero. Actually, maybe a more generous comparison would be Scott Lever, the stuntman who did a lot of appearances as Spider-Man back in the 80s. And he was also on the cover of Amazing Spider-Man 262. I remember seeing that cover as a kid and being like, oh my God, Spider-Man is real. He does exist. And I got that same feeling from this movie. As I said, there were times where you just see, obviously Tom Holland in the real suit. And it's just like, dude, that's him. That's the guy. John Bernthal is in this movie as the Punisher, and he's doing his John Bernthal thing, which I'm a little bit over, to be honest. This is not my preferred flavour of Punisher, to be honest, but there is a nice little bromance, I guess, or a frenemies thing going on between Spidey and Frank Castle. It's a nice little pairing that kind of throws back to old issues of Marvel Team Up or something like that. Now, this is the most New York Spider-Man movie, possibly ever, but certainly since the Raimi movies. Tom Holland leans into the New York accent in a way that kind of surprised me how New Yorky he gets at times. But it's actually perfect, especially when he's masked up. It kind of adds to the bravado and the cheekiness of Spider-Man, that confidence when the mask is on.
Did you stretch? You a big stretcher? It's so good for you. You ready?
The movie's definitely a little bloated. There's just so much packed in there, whether it's the Hulk stuff or the Punisher stuff or the Neogenic Nightmare stuff, as I keep calling it, or even the Pete, MJ, and Ned stuff. And I feel like you could lose any one of those strands from the movie and still find a way to make it work, and it would be a lot more streamlined. But I like all of those things, and I suspect that the people who made this film also liked all those elements and wanted to keep them in there. So even though it does, lose its momentum towards the end, I'm glad that all that stuff is in there. It's all interesting to me. I've heard a lot of people say best Spider-Man movie since Spider-Man 2, and it might be a bit too early for me to definitively rank them, but I would probably agree with that. Off the top of my head, my ranking would go Spider-Man, the two Spider-Verse movies, if we're counting those, Spider-Man 2, and then Brand New Day. And it's a pretty considerable drop-off after that. So all in all, I walked into this movie with particularly low expectations. As I do, I have to say, all MCU movies nowadays. But I left as a very happy Spider-Man fan. Literally, as I was walking back to my car at midnight, I was mentally flicking through the long box of my mind and recalling comics that I'd read as a kid or episodes of the 90s cartoon and experiencing all of the warm feelings that came with that. Brand New Day just felt very authentic to that experience, to my experience of Spider-Man growing up. And not to, over-egg it too much, but that's a magical feeling, and I'm very grateful to this movie to have had that experience. Particularly because I'm finding increasingly that these movies aren't made for me. I'm an aging Marvel fan, and I feel like they are targeting like a younger demographic and referencing stuff that came after my time, like the Insomniac game or Spectacular Spider-Man or all this stuff that kind of wasn't for me. But for me, the golden age of Spider-Man was from 1994 when the animated series started to 2002 when the first Raimi movie hit, which fortuitously, I made a video all about that era called When Spider-Man Couldn't Miss, which I'm going to link on screen now. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend it, and I'll see you over there.